I'm Connie Leitner, and I will be co-moderating with Karima Batts, who will be joining us in a few moments as we do our panel discussion today, to just take a moment to kind of do a checkup on the current state of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in the rock climbing and outdoor industry. This is the first of many collaborations that we'll be doing between Climbing for Change and In Solidarity Project. We have a diverse set of panelists here, and we're talking in diversity in terms of race, in terms of position in the industry, as well as in terms of experience with DEI initiatives and work. We thought that it was important to open this dialogue and discussion up with people with a wide range of experience in DEI work so that we could get everyone started, no matter where they're at on their journey for trying to diversify our industry. Just give everyone an opportunity to have open, honest dialogue, answer and ask some tough questions. We realize there's a little vulnerability that's involved with it because as we're learning, as we're growing, that's always going to happen. But we believe that that type of open and honest dialogue with everyone along the spectrum of journey for doing DEI work, we think that that's really important in order for us to get closer to the goal of diversifying the industry like we want. I want to jump right into it and get started by first introducing our panelists that we have here. First we have, and I'll do this in alphabetical order, so it's no favoritism involved. The first person I'll introduce is Teresa Baker. Teresa is the founder of the Outdoor CEO Diversity in Solidarity Project. She works to bridge the gap between the DEI community and the different organizations working within the outdoor community in order to help them develop sustainable and meaningful programs to diversify our industry. Through consulting work, organized events, and leading difficult conversations, Teresa has a very long record of working to advance diversity and inclusion initiatives in the industry. So thanks for joining us, Teresa. Our next panelist actually should be joining us in a moment. So let me go down to the next one. Our next one is Kyra Condi. Kyra is a decorated professional rock climber that resides in Salt Lake City. She is one of 4 U.S. rock climbers that will be representing the United States in the now 2021 Olympic Games in Japan this summer. Kyra also serves on the USA Board of Directors and is a fellow member of their Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. So welcome, Kyra, and thanks for joining us. Our next panelist is Cody Camerlin. Cody is a member of the American Alpine Club, where he serves as the director of their Climb United initiative. I have to say, Climb United already has a very ambitious goal that they have decided to undertake as soon as the organization was actually developed. Cody also serves on the board of directors for the Salt Lake Climbers Alliance, and he serves on their Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, also known as JEDI committee. So thanks for joining us, Cody. Our next panelist, you know, I have to read this one to make sure I get it right. It's Kai Leitner. He's a professional rock climber that's earned numerous national and international accolades in the sport. He's also a full-time college student at Babson College and the founder of Climbing for Change, a nonprofit organization that is committed to increasing diversity in rock climbing and the outdoor industry. He also happens to be my son. Hi, Kai. And last but certainly not least, we have Jess Powell. Jess is the partnership and event manager at Black Diamond Equipment. Last summer, Jess worked to spearhead Black Diamond's 250K initiative, where their main goal was to diversify outdoors, which included developing a sustainable DEI plan and allocating $250,000 in funding to support advancing DEI initiatives in the industry. So, hi, Jess. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Karima Batts will be joining us in a moment, and I probably should go ahead and introduce us. So she's like me. She jumps right in and likes to get started. But Karima is the founder of the Adaptive Climbing Group. They're currently operating in cities all across the United States. Her program is primarily responsible for supporting a lot of athletes that attend that represent the United States at the International Adaptive World Climbing Championship. She's also instrumental. She's an instrumental force behind Climbing for Change. And she'll be joining us, like I said, in a moment. So welcome, everyone. Let me make sure I have everyone admitted from the chat room. Yeah, I have them in. Okay. Welcome, everyone. And thanks for joining us. Now, is there anything that I missed? If you guys want to quickly say anything else about yourself that I missed, if some interesting facts you want to throw in, or did I do okay? Okay.
Did all right.
I think that Karima is one of the many people with your name in the chat, Connie. She was messaging me.
Tell her to change the name so I can see exactly which one it is, and then Kai will admit. For our participants that are with us on Zoom or on Facebook Live, I'd like to give you guys like a brief overview of how we're going to just run things today. We have 4 main subject areas that we plan to pose to our panelists. And in addition to having our panelists answer some of these questions, we would love to see your comments, questions in the chat, because we will put those questions and I'll try to get to as many of them as we can. We'll monitor both the Facebook Live comment section as well as the comment section on Zoom so that we can get to as many questions as possible to pose for our panelists. I guess we should say in advance, discussions about diversity, they always involve sensitive and sometimes even emotionally charged topics. So it's important that everyone remains courteous and even respectful throughout the conversation so that we can ask and answer some of the tough questions. In order to get started, before we even talk about the progression of inclusion initiatives in our industry, I think it's important to discuss why diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives is important. Why is that even a thing? Why is that something that should be considered and embraced by companies, athletes, and everyone across all industries, not just the outdoor industries? So no particular order, if you guys will hop right in and get started with answering and talking with us. Unmute your mics.
I'm so used to doing these in class. I'm used to like raising my hand or like finding the little hand button. I'm like, okay, now I can speak. I think for me personally, I've always done so much work with diversity and inclusion because starting out in this sport, I remember walking into the gym and meeting my first coach, Shane, and being a part of the community and just not seeing many people who look like me, not only in the gym, but with the climbers I looked up to. I constantly saw posters on the wall of Chris Sharma and Adam Andra and all these people. And while I think that they're such admirable athletes, I couldn't really see myself in them at all. And so I always tried to get my friends into this sport, and a lot of them told me that I was weird, I was acting too white, that I should do something normal, more accessible, something that I actually make money from. And I'm happy enough to be where I am today on this panel and achieve as much as I can. But I think that it's really important to let people know that like these options are for us and they're available to us, and that we shouldn't be pigeonholed by boxes and stereotypes that society puts us in. So, yeah.
It's hard to follow Kai ever, but I think for somebody who's had the privilege of enjoying the outdoors my whole life, I am super aware of the benefits, physical, emotional, all of those benefits that come with that. And I think the cool thing about this DEI work is that it has brought to our attention the barriers that are there for other people so that we can start breaking those down and everybody can have those benefits in their lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Jess, I would kind of build on that, right? And I don't necessarily think that that is the wrong question. I think that maybe we need to reframe it a little bit and maybe reconstruct it, right? And ask ourselves in the outdoor industry where we went wrong. Why is it that the outdoor industry doesn't look like the nation in a whole as its population, right? So if we reconstruct it that way, and it forces us to ask what did we do? And further, it forces us to acknowledge that there are problems and that we should change at a fundamental level, right? And so that's where we can start to get into that real work to get us where we need to be.
I guess I'll speak.
I'm like, you're the most experienced of all of us with this, so chime in for us.
I think it's a matter of looking at where this country is. The country itself is diverse on so many levels, yet the industry doesn't represent that. We must take into account what's currently taking place, the racial demographic shift that's taking place in this country. That is what this country needs to deal with, not just the outdoor industry, the tech industry, and all these other industries. They need to address this head on. And 5 years ago, African Americans accounted for $1 trillion in 1 year in spending. It's projected to be 1.5 trillion this year. How many of those dollars are coming into the outdoor industry? That's what people need to understand, is that if you're not keeping up with the demographic shift that's taking place, you are leaving out a customer base that has the money to spend. But even more important than that is you're leaving out people who can help in this fight around environmental justice. If these outdoor spaces are not protected, they fall by the wayside. So why not include people who can help in that fight?
Make Karima co-host.
And that's the larger issue at stake.
Yeah, absolutely, Teresa. That's a really good point, and something that we've talked about at USA Climbing a lot as well is,
let me know when you've made her co-host. I can tell her.
If we're not having everybody have access to rock climbing and to the outdoor industry, like we're missing out on this entire athlete pool. And if USA Climbing, one of our biggest goals as an organization is high performing athletes, and you're really limiting yourself and pigeonholing yourself, like you said, if you don't have the largest athlete pool as possible.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think another point to add on is that we've seen that with the trajectory of the country becoming much more diverse, I feel like because we lack so much diversity, we're so less culturally aware of the trends of the country, and also like how we might be offending other demographic groups. And we've seen multiple times over the past several months, years in general, how people put out statements or pushed products that have been incredibly racist, incredibly offensive, and not even know about it. And a lot of this is because they lack the diversity and perspective to know when things are and aren't appropriate.
So you don't think the coolest monkey in the jungle was a good idea for a campaign ad?
Oh yeah. No, yeah, that H&M ad was just one example of a product where it's like if one Black person had been in the room and just cleared that or had looked at it, it would have immediately told you that that's not appropriate at all. Which is why I think it's super important that not only just capitalizing on the diversity in the market that we don't have access to in the outdoors, but also making sure that we're not alienating the few that are in the community and that exist right now.
I wanted to start with this topic because I think I've had discussions with Teresa before where she said something about the copycat syndrome and how it seems like a lot of people jump on board with putting the statements out there because everyone else is, so they feel like they need to. And it's important if you're doing something to know why. And I think we've had that discussion before, Teresa, just understanding why it's important to begin with, why it's something that should be embraced instead of just doing it because it's the cool thing to do or you don't want to feel pressure if you don't do it.
I think with this industry, because people are so fearful of saying or doing the wrong thing and being called out, They just follow the trend. They follow what everyone else is doing, and they tend to think that that's the appropriate thing to do. I would much rather a company say absolutely nothing if they do not believe in the statement they're putting out. Do not tell me that Black Lives Matter if I can go to your board or your leadership and not see Black people. Who you are it speaks to me louder than any message you can put out there. Don't have me go and search for these people that you claim to care about. It's a slap in the face, really, to the work, because what it says is that we are just going to follow the trend, whether we believe in it or not. And I know a lot of times this comes from upper leadership in the company. And I know that a lot of marketing managers and whatnot don't necessarily believe in that, but that's the pressure that's applied to follow suit.
I think part of the reason why we're here now with this discussion is because in 2020, it's when the country was forced to sit still. We were scared. We were sitting inside, didn't know what was going on. And in the midst of this happening, everyone was captivated by watching a young man plead for his life and cry out to his dead mom. We saw it, and it's like it was an awakening that kind of occurred. And I think, to go back to what you just said, to put the square up or say that Black Lives Matter, we're at a point right now where maybe you did make a mistake before. Maybe you didn't have the representation in different places before, but it's 10 months after the squares came up. So by now it's more than enough time to be able to show where there is a pattern to move towards or to fix some things that you've done in the past. So I think that's why this is a checkup, just to see, are you actually putting your money and your efforts and your time where your mouth is?
Yeah, and I think another point to even clarify is that I saw a question on my Instagram the other day where it talked about how some of the panelists here may not be BIPOC members or have a lot of experience or context doing a diversity and inclusion work. And I think that's exactly why I wanted to invite you guys on this panel, because yes, I think it's important for individuals like myself, like Teresa, to be leading this work and leading the organizations to make sure that it's being guided in the right direction. But we also have to hear from the perspectives of our allies that are in key parts of the industry that have the potential to influence large demographics of people. Like with Kyra being on her DEI task force at USA Climbing and working with the IOC and being an Olympic athlete at a time when the sport is booming, you're about to get a ton of attention. She's going to be in a really key position. And with Cody being with the American Alpine Club and Jess working with the Black Diamond, a major company in the industry who's been a staple for so many decades, I think it's important that we hear from these perspectives as well, just like we want to hear from Teresa and myself.
I think it's important because maybe if they hear you guys talk about some of the things that's going on, whether it's the positives, the negatives, struggles, maybe that'll encourage others to open up and to be vulnerable, to ask those questions, to ask important questions, to answer some of the struggles so that they know they're not alone, they're not the only one. So I agree. And so I'm glad that you guys wanted that level of diversity also, I think, with experience with everyone up and talking.
Yeah, and Kai and Connie, I really want to thank you guys for having us. I think this is a really great discussion and something that a lot of people will be able to benefit from, because I think there are a lot of people feeling lost as to how to help. And it's these discussions and you guys taking your time to do this that makes people become better allies. And that's, I think, what a lot of us want to do.
Thank you.
Exactly. Okay. Now, the topic of the discussion. Where are we in terms of DEI in the industry right now? I think specifically, Cody, Kyra, Jess, you guys are working on different major initiatives. I'd like you guys to speak up from, I guess, a personal perspective of where we are. But I think additionally, for Kai and Teresa, and even Cody also, because you're probably getting a lot of this as well. I'd like to hear your overall perspective, because you're working with different companies and helping different individuals with the journey, whether it's consulting and different work.
And also possibly how things have changed since the summer and since the movement started.
Yeah. You know, I think this is a great question, because I think in mass, we're ready to lean into the choppier waters in this work, right? Like we have folks and brands and orgs showing up, and we cannot discount that at all. And if I could center around the American Alpine Club and the Climb United program, I mean, we're working in some pretty strong actionable work right now in effort to address discriminatory route names in climbing. And we have a lot of participants right now in the industry, and it's tough work. And so we can't discount that, but we still have pretty far to go, right? And I think
the fact that those route names are still there 10 months later, and we're still having to convince people that they need to change. Yeah.
And we're using inclusion still as a euphemism for assimilation, right? So if we can talk about corporations, we talk about the economic benefit of diversity rather than the human endeavor of it. So we still measure our leadership on DEI initiatives by efficiency, ROI, and cost. And that's going to continue until we can say that DEI work is a human-based work. And it is not quick. It is not efficient. So we are like kind of standing maybe on the edge of the Rock of Gibraltar right now, which, you know, we're on the edge of safety. And this isn't criticism. Like I believe that climbing and climbers, we're ready to do this. But I think we need to check ourselves, all of us, and make sure that we know what we're ready to do. Because again, right now, I think it's still just a little safe. Because like you just said, Dr. Leitner, we haven't changed the names. And we can talk about it all we want, but we haven't changed them.
Yes, and it's still pushback. And you can't be an ally and think I'm going to climb the slave driver boulder. I mean, it's kind of, it's definitely a conflict there.
Yeah, people decide they want to be an ally when folks are looking, right? They'll repost things, but then they'll go climb some.
Folks are looking. That's the phrase.
Exactly.
Yeah, I call that performative racial marketing.
Yep.
Kyra, how about USA Climbing, the DEI task force? I guess, why was that something that was even formed? Where do you have a general direction where you guys are headed with it?
Yeah.
Can you comment on that a little bit?
So, the general goal of the DEI task force is to make USA Climbing more accessible from all angles. Like obviously rock climbing is a pretty socioeconomically privileged sport, especially. And so working on things like partnering with gyms, allowing membership costs to be subsidized, things like that, so that more people can have access to our sport. And that's just like the very base level as far as making climbing more accessible. There's also things like making venues accessible, not holding paraclimbing national championships in Bend, Oregon, where you have to take a tiny plane to a not very accessible airport. Things like that are just weren't considered a lot, like trying to make sure that those are top priorities of the board and the staff of USA Climbing. And that's like a small part of it, I guess. And then, like I said, obviously also in Team USA and in USA Climbing, there's all sorts of, I lost my train of thought there. It's obviously just beneficial for everyone to have an inclusive environment. Sport increases your mental health, it increases your physical health. Inclusivity for trans athletes is like absolutely important, especially for like mental health of trans youth, things like that, all things that we're working on. And I'm actually on a council with Team USA as well for racial and social justice, which is working to upend Rule 50, which currently disallows athletes from protesting at the games. And so, the Olympics have kind of historically been politicized, but this is taking away the athletes' right essentially to protest. And so Team USA is working against that IOC rule to change that so that athletes can use their voice to on that huge platform that
as long as we're respectful, why not?
Wow. Okay. So that's honestly like the first time I've had to process that. Because for me, I know every Olympics that I watch, you always see the Black power of the 60s on the podium from track and field. And they politicize and they advertise Olympic protests in a way to like make the Olympics look favorable.
Yeah,
so I think that's so hypocritical.
In 1968, and we use that photo for advertising, and nobody talks about the fact that they were completely ostracized from the team, and like their families received death threats at the time. It's now it's obviously wouldn't be allowed, and so we're trying to change that so that
right. I just like you can't have it both ways, because those ads are still playing today, and then I guarantee you they'll still play in leading up to Tokyo. You can't have an ad like that praising protests and then have a rule restricting it. That's insane.
I have a comment that came in. Oh, I'm sorry, from Melise Edwards on the chat room, and she's talking about how do you feel about the argument that using strategic language in a lot of the things, whether it's that companies are actually doing in order to target or I guess segment the Black community or show support of the Black community.
Wait,
how do you
Mom,
feel about that? Yes.
Before we get to that question, I think Karima had something that she wanted to say on the topic that we were just about to leave. Sorry, Karima. I saw you cut in. I want to make sure.
Yes, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My question actually was for you and Kyra, because the three of us have had experience going to World Cups and World Championships, and seeing how different cultures in many countries have come together, right? And to participate in the sport. And there have been issues because of those country relations that are outside of the sport. And I heard you talk about, certain viewpoints and social identity and racial identity. And we've seen that actually play out, behind the scenes in climbing competition. Do you have any comments about what kind of changes and ripple effects, that we make? One of the questions we had was about, transgender in sports. And I'm going to start off this conversation because we've had this conversation on the DEI Committee of USA Climbing. Whether or not bills pass here in America, there are 65 other countries that also compete in the sport that have their own, countries, laws, and cultural things, and everybody's, ideals need to be respected, whether they disagree with ours or not. And so the translation of whether or not, someone from USA Climbing gender is recognized to compete, even if they made the U.S. team, they would still have to compete as that original gender, right? And the same goes for any other sport actually currently in the Olympics. And that was one of the, I'm commenting on one of the questions that we had there in the chat, and I wondered, your thought process of the ripple effects of the changes that we make here in the sport, whether in gyms or in competition, and how do you think that might affect competition worldwide?
That's a big question. I think I'm gonna try to break that question down as much as I can. As someone who runs an organization like Climate for Change, I would like to first say that when we talk about DEI work and BIPOC work, we mean not only just people of color, but all the intersectional identities that break down into that. So it's like people of color with disabilities, people of color like who are women and gender and all those things. So when we are pushing these initiatives going into the gym, not only are we looking at it through that lens, but we're trying to make sure that we are giving as many opportunities as possible to communities that are typically marginalized, so that they have more options to be able to compete in these competitions and be more represented. I feel like once you see more of those like people of color faces in the sport, then there's larger voices calling out those discriminatory policies. I feel like a lot of times they can be swept under the rug or not recognized because the people who they affect, their voices aren't large enough for them to point them out, for them to make them seen or make them like immediate agenda topics that organizations tackle. And so I feel like that is a long process that starts with a lot of the grassroots work that we're all talking about right now. which is trying to increase diversity and increase inclusion as much as we can so we can get as many of those voices at the table.
But that comment that Melise made, she was saying that it's almost like we get tired sometimes of hearing things in terms of Black or just different intersectionalities or just different demographic groups. She thinks that it would be great when we get to a point where we can be invested in issues that are just unjust, that disproportionately harms people, period, across the board. It doesn't matter what their color is, what their gender is, what their sexual identity is. If it's causing harm to any person, then it's something that we need to consider. And we're hoping, I guess that's part of this work, is in a few years, if we're successful, we won't need to talk about it because we will be at that point. It's just that we're not there yet. And we're just hoping we can get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Karima, kind of also to answer your question, I feel like kind of influencing within our sphere of influence is something we've talked about a lot on the DEI task force, as you know. And I think, USA Climbing has a big voice within IFSC, and then the IFSC has a pretty big voice within the, Olympic movement. And so ideally, if we start creating those change on smaller scales, ideally it'll, trickle out into the larger scales. And kind of like what Kai said, you get those voices, represented on larger and larger scales.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my hope is that eventually this conversation will fall by the wayside. My hope is that in 5 years, this conversation is no longer needed. But until we get there, we have to fight like hell, just like it was in the 60s, and just like it was for those who came before me. It wasn't a matter of having this conversation, for 5 or 10 years. It was a matter of having this conversation until things changed. So right now, things are changing at such a slow pace. That's why it's important to continue to have these conversations, but not just with people in the community. It's important to have these conversations with change makers, with people in positions of power who can change things quicker. That's why it's important that, the main voices in climbing speak out. That's how things are going to change. It's important that the leaders of these mainstream environmental companies speak out around not just matters that affect them personally, but matters that affect this country. That's how things change. By being a pest and constantly speaking on these issues. It's frustrating as hell for us. It's to speak on these issues all the time, but it ain't about us. It's about those who will come after us that will point back to us and say, why didn't you fight harder? So that's why it's important that we continue to speak on these issues in hopes of it falling by the wayside eventually.
Because it's not needed, because it's something that's in the very fiber and thread of everything that we do.
It's woven into the business plan. People of color, people with disabilities, LGBTQ community. It's woven into how we do business. We're not there yet. That's why there are months that are dedicated to these individual communities, because we're fighting, but the change isn't happening
not quick enough,
fast enough.
Teresa, hell yes. That is the thing, because none of us want to be talking about this. None of us want to actually be doing this, right? Because it shouldn't be a thing to have to ask people to care about folks who have been historically marginalized and then ask them to see us other than the times that we're actually being discriminated against, hurt, harmed, or murdered.
Or during our month.
Exactly. You get a month. Good for you. Like, come on.
Now, Jess, when Black Diamond first posted that whole 250K program, the name sounded great. I mean, the numbers sounded great. But have those checks actually been written? Talk to us a little bit beyond that. I mean, I'm sorry, but I gotta.
Let us know, Jess. Let us know.
A fair question, a definitely fair question. So when we made that pledge, it was like an immediate kind of panic at BD, because it was like, okay, like we made this pledge, but we want this money to go to something that is going to last, that is going to something that we can build on, that is going to something that can create real change in these communities that we're trying to influence. And
so was this a one-time 250 thing? Like,
no. Yeah. What we ended up doing was, when we were trying to make those choices, we did a bunch of research and talked to really trusted people and people from those communities. And we were like, okay, like, what are the issues? And a couple things just like kept popping up, and it was lack of representation and lack of resources. And we were like, we can help with those. This issue is huge, but we can help with those. And so from there, we reached out to different organizations that were already doing the work that we wanted to try and help with. And instead of going to them with an idea or a pitch, we went to them with our resources and said, hey, I have this that I can put towards what you're doing. What can we do together to further the work that you already have going on? And we were lucky that people trusted us to do the right thing. And we're going to have these partners for years and years and years. And hopefully just be able to continue to grow those and influence and affect more people's lives.
Full disclosure, when you guys called last summer asking for help, that was one of the reasons why we actually asked you to be a part of the panel, because there was a level of vulnerability with admitting that you didn't know what was going on, admitting that you were you were clueless, you needed guidance, you needed direction. And to be honest, this is something that we need more companies to do. And this is, again, I have a lot of conversations with Teresa, something she said a lot of times for Kai also. People thinking they can fix our problems is the worst in the world. Throwing money at it, writing a check thinking you know what the problem is and how to fix it isn't a smart approach. You have to go to the source and ask.
Right.
So I think, yeah.
And we appreciated you guys reaching out, because it seemed like we saw all that was going on and a lot of the backlash that companies were getting from like trying to start initiatives. And even myself, even when I started Climbing for Change, what people think would be this great idea, no, like I got so many comments and messages from people looking at me and saying like, why does it have to be a race thing? Why does it have to be a this thing? And I think this even touches back on Melissa's thing, where it's like, unfortunately, when we use all-inclusive language, our country has a very funny history with the word all. Like all are created equal.
We weren't included in that. Justice for all. I mean, we still weren't even a full person. So
right. So honestly, the more inclusive the language, often the less heard our concerns and our voices are. And honestly, a lot of times we get ignored in the conversation. And so until that issue is eradicated and we are included in that narrative and our voices are bigger and more heard, then we have to have that targeted language and those targeted efforts. So we definitely appreciated you guys understanding that you didn't know and you were coming to us.
Yeah, no problem.
I
think it was the first thing when it came up, and they were like, oh, Jess, you work with like philanthropic organizations. And I was like, not a DEI specialist. Like I need help to know what to do, because I don't know these communities. I don't know what they need. And I sure as hell am not going to guess with $250K. Like I want this money to actually make a change, make some differences. And we're grateful still that you guys believed us, and that it was a real desire to make something long term.
We were a little skeptical at first, Jess.
Oh,
you remember those conversations. I think Teresa's my favorite, because her expressions, she can't control them. And so she'll have a look, even in the Zoom meetings, and right, that skepticism is there. It's like, you're going to have to prove this.
I think Karima has something she wanted to add too.
Yes, go ahead, Karima.
I don't know. You guys are doing so well. I'm like, you're saying everything I'm thinking, because we've already had these discussions in your house, like, and yeah, I definitely say I was overwhelmed in the beginning, watching everyone kind of, look for all the companies who they felt were not being performative or asking what they were doing. I even saw minority-owned companies like Evolved, who was getting like reamed on Instagram. And I remember how exhausted me and Kai were, constantly commenting and answering. And you know, doing more actually defensive work than we should have been doing to like do more education. And I think one of the biggest things I found is, yes, there were companies who wanted to reach out. And I think it's very important that we're careful while we're trying to hold people accountable, that we don't make them scared to even talk to us and ask us, what do I do? Because they feel like nothing they say is right, nothing they do is right, which is some of the responses I got from some organizations and climbing gyms who are answering open letters from their community and their staff about, you know, equity and being responsible to their and to the people around them. But yet, you know, we have to figure out a balance, I would say, of communication, of holding people accountable, but not scaring people off.
Before we go on to the next topic, and I also want to say that we're probably going to end up extending this about 15 minutes, this talk, because I want to make sure that we hone in on the questions, the questions that we have in the chat towards the end. But there's a very relevant one that I'm looking at right now that came from Kenji, that said that he noticed when Kai talked about bringing outside voices to learn and take part in DEI conversation, it seemed like you included Cody as an outside voice. And he was asking, is there a way to bring Asian Americans into the conversation of DEI, and how oftentimes they're left out of the equation? Our definition of BIPOC includes Asian Americans, to be honest. So if Kai, I'm not sure if that statement was made, but I think it may have been in error, because even the scholarships and everything that's available through Climbing for Change, but Asian Americans are included. You have the same marginalized problems that you have. You guys are a marginalized population in the U.S. Like a lot of the other demographics that we talked about. So definitely included. Go ahead, Kai.
Absolutely, they're included in our search database. And wait, just to clarify, I thought that Kenji was saying that I did include Cody in that conversation. Did he say I did not?
No, he made it seem like he was an outside voice.
I think it's because you were just.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I think it's Kai. I think you were just kind of going down your screen in the order you were looking at people.
Yeah, I was. So you're not on my immediate screen, so I can't see you.
Yeah, but Kenji, thank you for pointing that out.
No, that's a very good point. Yes, and I think that now more than ever in our current political climate, do we see how the Asian American community is a marginalized community as well, and do get excluded a lot from the narrative, and a lot of the discussions around them aren't taken as seriously. So I do want to make that clear, that even myself personally and the programs included in Climate for Change are all inclusive of BIPOC, including Asian American citizens.
Can I just jump in real fast, because that ties in, and Karima just mentioned something about holding people accountable, but also not scaring them off. And with that comment, and Constance, you've talked about vulnerability a good bit, and I just really want to stress to people that that's really important in these conversations. That vulnerability is not easy, but like we just saw, you can make one very innocent mistake where you're looking down the Zoom screen and listing names off, and it seems like you might have left someone out of a BIPOC group, right? And we're going to get. We're going to be wrong. We're going to have people that don't agree with us. And you have to be vulnerable enough to say, maybe I'm not fully right. Maybe I'm totally wrong, but these conversations aren't easy. And if we're scared of that, then we're not going to go anywhere. So yeah, I think that all just kind of fell in nicely.
That's a really, really good point, Cody, because I feel like that's a lot of people who have large Instagram followings are afraid to speak out. And, that's completely against the point. This is not about me, it is about trying to help a community that I'm not a part of. And, if I'm afraid to speak on it because of whatever, that makes it about me. And then that's no longer.
I am glad you just said that, because being afraid to speak on it is a big reason why a lot of people have been silent. Because if you say anything and open your mouth, it's, well, I've never seen you with Black people in the past or people of color in the past, so why aren't you doing? I mean, it's like an instant. Well, look, Kaya's like, "Ooh, you didn't go there. I did." And so you're afraid to speak out. And it's like, Teresa's talked about this one before. Everyone has to start somewhere. And even if you didn't do some things before, it's not a matter of, since you didn't do it before, I can't believe you're speaking out now. There has to be, you're going to be vulnerable at first. You have to start somewhere. And once you start, you have to be consistent. So the people realize it wasn't you jumping on a bandwagon. This is what you believe, and you were silent before, maybe because you didn't want the backlash. But that's the stopping the backlash. And yeah, we need you to speak up. We need you to be vocal, and we need other people to support, giving you that right to be able to do that. And you're gonna mess up. I mess up. With Karima on the line right now, Karima has corrected me multiple times about things that I did not know I was insensitive about when it comes to individuals with disabilities. And so it's not a racial issue, and people figured, that is just as bad. Offending people is offending people. Marginalizing people and just ignoring their right, their presence, their ability to be, to thrive in society like everyone else, it's wrong. It doesn't matter what the demographic is that you're marginalizing. So I'm going to say firsthand, I've done it recently, like a week or so ago, and she had to correct me. So you're going to mess up as you're learning, as you're growing, but you have to ask the questions. Someone corrects you, tell them, okay, I'll fix it. And so, but just not being afraid to speak up in the first place, that's kind of important. That moves into a next thing. Go ahead, Kai.
Oh, I was gonna say that I think that also goes into like minority standing up for other minority groups as well. I feel like so often it can get into a conversation of people comparing and contrasting privileges and positions in the community. And I think that is a very slippery slope that prevents us from unifying towards like the goals that we're trying to achieve and the systems that we're trying to eradicate. So I think it's incredibly important that when we do this work, we're trying to be as inclusive as possible, because you're right, maybe one group doesn't experience a certain style of discrimination as another, but I think that, a wise person once said, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And so trying to hone in on those things as broadly as possible and help people out where they need help is just incredibly important in this work.
We are getting some good, I want to ask this one last topic for you guys, and then I want to flip to the chat, because we're getting some good and even some hot questions that's going to put some of y'all in the hot seat. I'm telling you in advance, so just prepare. But a question real quick before we hop into our hot seat round. What challenges or roadblocks, I guess that's why you've already started it, Kyra, talking about challenges that you guys are encountering while trying to implement the DEI work. And I think that's important because people that are doing it to know that they're not alone with some of the challenges. So if you guys can tell me direct experience, and I think Kai and Teresa, with you guys, I want the tea. I want the midnight calls and emails and texts that you get about problems that are going on with implementing. Just talk about some of those roadblocks and challenges and even advice that you're giving to people as they're trying to overcome them. So if you guys will comment on that before we get into our hot seat round with answering some of these questions from the chat.
Do you mind if I start this one off?
Sure.
Because I don't know if you guys can realize this by this background, but I'm driving. So in the car with me was fellow disability advocate Vasu, and we had a lot of conversations while he, was here with me. And one of the things we talked about was, the struggle of, we get questions from other people with disabilities who are trying to take part in sport and trying to understand why, the gym says, they can't help them, a wheelchair user, we don't have anything here from you, are the type of emails that I've heard a lot, actually, over time. And how do you answer that? How do they deal with that frustration? Because one of the things, especially with paraclimbing and specifically, there is not paraclimbing access in every single climbing gym, right? He works in ski, in which adaptive ski has been around for maybe 30 years, and every ski mountain pretty much has some sort of adaptive ski program or a nonprofit running one. With a younger parasport like climbing, a paraclimber can't just walk into a gym and go climbing all the time. And they don't understand that, let's say they climb all the time in, Seattle, right? And there's an adaptive climbing program there, and the gym's used to seeing people with disabilities climbing. Then they go visit some place in Arizona, and they can't go climbing because, you know, the person at the front desk says, oh, you're a person with no legs, and you want to go climbing, you have to wear climbing shoes to go climbing, you know, and they don't understand how climbing prosthesis works or any of those things. So we have like a series of of understanding barriers, you know.
With Karima and Kyra also being on that task force with USA Climbing, because we're directly, and I'm on that one also, we're directly in working with a lot of the gyms. That may be something we need to make sure that's prioritized. We're just trying to get more gyms to have the programs, the routes, just some that are kind of adaptable, so that these routes are set up, but then other people could climb them, you know, as well. It could be anyone, but just to think about that a little bit more, that may be something to make sure that we're prioritizing as we put that down.
Totally. And I remember Karima even mentioning once, you know, there was posters about paraclimbing in the gym, but only amputees were shown. And so somebody who was visually impaired didn't know that they could be included in paraclimbing. And so making sure you have that representation.
Exactly. Any more roadblocks?
Yeah, diversity is not a monolith, you know, just like, you know, women are not monoliths, LGBT, you know, TQ people are not monoliths, and people with disabilities are not monoliths either. And so people don't understand that there's diversity among the diversity, you know, and sometimes we can even exclude in our fight for diversity a lot. You know, I would like to say our example should be those college ads, you know, they have like one of each in the college ads. Yeah. And it's like if all of our outdoor stuff kind of looked like that, no one would be like, I don't see myself there, you know?
And yeah. And that's deliberate at the universities. As a university employee, that's deliberate. And you're right, it should be just as deliberate. Any more roadblocks that you guys are encountering?
I'll speak to one. I'll be brief though, because most of it has already been discussed. For us at Black Diamond, our roadblock, big roadblock, was community skepticism. And it was because we hadn't spoken out before. And then all of a sudden we came out with an opinion, and there were things that didn't line up, and we had lost the trust of these people, like of these communities that we wanted to now engage with. And it is really, really hard to like earn that back. And so what
since you just said that, Jess, that brings me to a hot button question that came up, if you don't mind, in the chat room.
Okay, I'm ready.
Question is, why did Black Diamond wait until 2020 to start prioritizing diversity?
Yeah, and it's a fair question, and it's a hard question to answer, because there isn't an excuse. We were late, and it wasn't until we were in that position last summer where we were frozen, all of us as a country, in these lockdowns, and we're watching these things happen and be broadcasted on television, that we were like, you know, we took the time to sit with ourselves, to sit with this country, to sit as an industry and really evaluate, like, what can we do to fix this? Because I think we all wanted to believe that this isn't an issue anymore. And I know that the evidence has been out there, and this is not new. This is not new.
I think that's one of our biggest frustrations, that people kept telling us it wasn't an issue anymore. And it's like people say in 2020, oh my God, this just started happening. We can't believe. And it's like, no, it didn't just started happening. This has been happening. We've been telling you it's been happening.
Right. And I think it really was this huge transition movement where we can't deny it anymore. Like, it is not something we can pretend isn't happening. It is not something we can pretend that we've moved past. And it is not something we can pretend that we're exempt from because we aren't in politics. Like, you know, there are still things that we can do to make changes and make things better within our sphere of influence. And
here's an uncomfortable question for two of you guys. Kai was one of the only athletes of color on BD's athlete team. Why is he no longer a BD athlete?
I think.
Look, I'm just
I
reading.
can answer that.
I'm reading. Okay, go ahead.
I did not expect to be brought in this conversation.
Maybe I need to mute your mic. Okay, go ahead.
Me? I mean, I'll answer the question. I mean, I've worked with Black Diamond for years. And unfortunately, the reason why I was
for years, starting when?
Excuse me?
For years, starting when?
Oh, I started working with Black Diamond when I was 10 years old. So a really long time. And I had a really long lasting relationship with them and I really enjoyed working with the company. But as the company grew throughout my working with them, they started going into different, like adding different products to their roster, like clothes and climbing shoes and such. And I had already had other pre-existing relationships in those sectors, like my clothing sponsor is Adidas, my climbing shoe sponsor is Evolve. And so when I didn't renew my contract, it had nothing to do with any external factors. It was more so the fact that I didn't want to end my relationship with other companies I was working with to
But you were gear only before. Why didn't they continue gear only?
Excuse me? What'd you say?
You were gear only before. You were but
they
you said that they didn't have those.
Yeah,
other
they were forcing they were forcing all of the athletes to kind of like go into other sectors of the market that they were going into instead of just keeping our gear only sponsors. And I was kind of put in a position where I had to choose. So it was purely a business decision, purely a product decision, nothing to do with what was going on. And also my contract ended at the very beginning of 2020, before all of the stuff was happening with the movement.
Okay.
I like to say that there are a lot of companies out there that have made mistakes, that are in the process of trying to do the right thing. Companies like Black Diamond. There are a lot of companies. My hope is that companies who are reactive now, based on events that took place in 2020. My hope is that they will come to understand that this cannot be a just in the moment type reaction. This has to be a commitment that these companies are making long term. So sure, there may be companies where we're like, nope, don't trust you. Those companies have to stick to it to regain that trust. You have to keep moving forward in action, not just in, conversations such as this.
Or a black square post.
In order to gain trust, it means you gotta sit and take those punches. You gotta sit and understand that they are deserved and that people from underrepresented communities have always been the target of a justice system that today, as of today, has been on trial and will be in the future. What happened to Mr. George Floyd was not a first, but for whatever reason, this industry rallied behind that. But I'm old enough to understand what happened to Rodney King and how the justice...
We saw the videos, the same type of videos, yes.
How the justice system and how the outdoor community didn't rally behind that. But for whatever reason, they're rallying now. And that's awesome to see. But it has to be beyond this moment. That's how you regain the trust. Look, we are in this for the long haul. And what we understand is that we need to give people space to try, fail, and try again. That's the only way we are going to make progress with our imperfect selves.
But that's provided they're consistent with those actions moving forward. That's the space that we're given for them to watch the consistency in the future. You're right.
Well, and that's also why, from us.
That was great, Teresa. Thanks.
We took the beating because it was like, we deserve it. Like we should have done things different a long time ago because these aren't new issues. But we knew that if we just kept on the trajectory and kept working towards these things and kept showing up, that eventually we'd earn trust back. And
I think you guys just answered Leo Kate's question. We had a comment in the chat that was saying that it took George Floyd's murder and all of the things happening on TV for companies to start speaking up. And his question was, I mean, how do we know who we can trust and who's genuine in, you know, the statements, the black squares, the things that they're saying? And I think that you guys just answered that. Consistency.
It's not going to be an in the moment decision. You know, I don't trust you because you posted Black Lives Matter. How you will regain the trust of a community, and not just underrepresented communities, but the community at large, is how you respond moving forward. The work that you put in moving forward, the changes that you make internally is how you will show that you care about this. And it's not just about one company or one organization. This country needs to change, period. These are systemic issues that we are dealing with. And it just so happens that we care about the outdoor industry, the outdoors, period. So that's what we are addressing. We can't, I personally, speaking of myself, I can't address everything. But what I will address is what I love, and that's my people, and that's the environment. So that's where my concern is, my people and the environment, and how we can get these huge companies and organizations together as a collective to address the issues and move forward in action, period.
I have, hi. I just wanted to say thank you, Teresa. That was a spiritual answer. And secondly, I just wanted to ask you guys another question, talking about internal changes, organizations, trust, and the sustainability of that. One big trend that's happening all over businesses, for-profit, nonprofit, are new positions, work positions in DEI. And Cody, you just came into a new position yourself that is for a nonprofit organization, American Alpine Club, that's, you know, working to make that change. I was wondering what everybody thinks about these new positions entering into these businesses that are very specifically DEI work positions, managers, coordinator positions.
Yeah, I'll address that if y'all don't mind. It is, I approach it and these positions with a high amount of skepticism, especially being hired into these positions as an Asian American. I think that there is a lot of fear of folks that this is window dressing. It's going to be, here's a position, we're going to fund it, and we're going to put you out there, and if it goes wrong, well, I mean, too bad, right? We tried, but we didn't try it. We made this person try. This one in particular, because I accepted it, obviously I don't feel that way, but I was very cautious going into it. So in general, I think that they're complex. It's good that we're doing it, but there has to be meaning behind it. And this goes back to something that Teresa talked about earlier, and we all, I know we have a through line to this. It has to go to the board, because if the board doesn't support this, then it's not going to go anywhere. And if leadership doesn't support it, and not just support it by saying, yeah, it's a good idea, let's try it out, but like literally we are going to change the systemic infrastructure of our company based on the input we gather from the community and the culture, right? A culture is what we demand the culture becomes. So if we can drive that and say the culture has to be accepting of this, and these positions just become standardized in a company, and they aren't exactly DEI positions, right? They just become like this human endeavor style position. And that's when we know that it actually worked. But yeah, I'll let everyone else chime in.
I have a question for you, Cody.
Yeah.
Someone asked, and make sure that you answer this after Kai. They asked, what are the AAC Climb United scholarships? So come back to that after Kai answered this question for us.
Okay, yeah, I was just going to touch on that skepticism that you said, because I feel like the skepticism comes because historically, a lot of the times we see positions like this, we see people put in as figureheads for for movements in a company, and the work never gets done because the people who are put in a position are never given the influence or power to actually institute real change. And I also think that's just not very fair to put that on one person in one position. It's like you said, like you have to see that change happen across the company, or higher up of a level where you actually see those voices being heard and that action being put in place. And so I do have mixed feelings, because while it's nice to see more people of color in those positions, it's like we have to see them actually being put in a position where they can create change, where they can do something in the company, and not just as we put this Black person or this Asian person here to save face.
Yeah, Kai, that's actually a good point. It's something that we've talked about on the DEI task force, is that we don't want it to be a committee eventually, because ideally it would just be something that's so ingrained within the culture of USA Climbing, that you don't need a committee for it. Obviously that's way far in the future, but that's the goal that we're trying to get to. So, Also,
you also see that a lot of times when these programs fail, they'll blame the person that was put in the position, not the company as a whole. So not only are they a person to save face, but then the person to take blame as well.
Okay. Answer that about the scholarship question for AAC Climb United scholarships. And I have a really good question from Scott Schuyler in the chat that I need to pose to you guys. This is one I think that a lot of companies are facing. So go ahead, answer that one quickly, Cody, and then I'll follow up with this question.
Yeah, so presently Climb United as a program doesn't offer any scholarships. We're not funded for that yet. We're only funded for 2 years at the moment. But right now we are going to release the Catalyst Grant, and that will be for BIPOC and LGBTQ community members, but that's not through Climb United. That's through the AAC as a whole. And
what do people have to do to be eligible for that, for those grants, for that?
I really can't tell you the details because I don't know them well enough, and I don't want to get it wrong. Yeah, so
is it on AAC's website?
Yes, it sure is.
Okay, awesome. Okay, here's a question, and this is a good one because I've heard this before, and I'm gonna need insight from you guys. We have someone, Scott Schuyler. He's on the outdoor education program at Cornell University. They have a large climbing program that's offered to a lot of people each semester. And they've done one with a women only course in the past, and it was very successful. They decided to do one for BIPOC students this semester. But as a result, they said, I'm quoting, a right-wing media source picked it up and ran stories with headlines like, an Ivy League college offers segregated rock climbing course. And because of that comment, everyone, the legal department, everyone got freaked out. But I've heard this before. It's kind of along the same lines of comments that I've seen on Kai's page. By offering scholarships to BIPOC individuals, this is like reverse racism. This is you're trying to market this type of segregated, intentionally racially charged thing.
No. First, let me say there is no such thing as reverse racism. Let's exclude that from the conversation first and foremost. So why are there these programs that are set aside for underrepresented communities or communities of color specifically? It's because historically we have not been included. It's just like, it's how do we include people that look different than the people who have already created a spot for themselves? You must reach out directly to these communities in order to include them. That's the only way we can create a space where people feel welcome. Again, the hope is that in the future, these programs will fall by the wayside, just like this conversation will fall by the wayside. But until then, it's vital that we reach out directly to these communities to invite them in so that they feel welcome in a space that historically has discriminated against them. Period.
I've never understood, why is it okay to offer women only programs, scholarships, grants, but when you do this for BIPOC individuals, it's wrong? They're both segmented populations. One of them definitely is more emotionally charged, and there's a lot of other history with our country that creeps into the picture. But why is one okay and the other isn't? So that's a good question that's coming up, because I've heard this before, and that's why a lot of companies are almost scared to offer some of the programs, because they're afraid of basically getting that label.
Okay, I have an answer for the question. It may not be very politically correct, but can I just go back real quick to even the reverse racism comment? Because I honestly, it's quite insulting every time I get that on my page, or when I get that in my DMs or just messages, because I feel like the concept of reverse racism just completely ignores all of the systems and work that's been done to put marginalized groups in the position that they are today. A lot of that work was targeted, and it's going to take targeted efforts to reverse their effects and increase diversity and inclusion and just socioeconomic disadvantages in these communities. And so just to try to talk down on the work that's trying to reverse the efforts that have been in place for centuries, decades, is insulting, and sometimes can be kind of demeaning. Okay, and so I don't know.
No, I agree with what you said, Kai. But what I want to get across to everyone is that we don't have all the answers to these questions. We are searching ourselves, but we can definitely look back to the history of this country to help us in understanding some of the whys. That's what I do. But what I want people to understand is this is a freaking hour and 15-minute, hour and a half conversation on matters that will not only affect this audience, but the wider audience, that's out there. This is a systemic problem, period. It's a problem that this country is facing, not just us. And my hope is that we can come together and put some of our feelings aside and address them, so that hopefully in 5 years, this will not be the conversation we're having, but rather this is the progress we've made. And it's going to take all of us. It's going to take people in positions of power to not give up that power, but to share in that power. That's what we need. We need people in love with humanity versus being in love with power. That's how we move forward in correcting some of these wrongs that have been done over years. We're individuals trying to address historical issues, and it's not easy, and it's hard.
It didn't get created in a few days.
Forgive us if we don't answer in a polite way or in a way that makes you feel good. We're trying, so give us all space to try. And hopefully within that, we'll find answers, and we can all put this conversation aside and move forward, period.
That was beautifully said, Teresa. I really appreciate you saying that. And I actually saw Maylee said something in the chat about kind of your question, Connie, versus the women-only events versus the BIPOC-only events. And it's that white women are included in the women-only events. And, this white feminism just is a real problem. And, it ignores trans women, it ignores Black women, it ignores Indigenous women. And, so addressing that as, a white woman, I think is also super important, and making sure that any feminism work that you do includes those voices as well. But I think that was a really good point by Maylise about kind of answering your question in that sense.
I also think it's not about reverse racism or racism. It's a human issue. What we're dealing with is a human issue, humans first. And if people think of it, not in the lines of, of that, maybe it could help some stronger ideals kind of soften a little bit. Why are you making it about race? I'm like, no, we're not making it about race. We're making it about humans. And individual humans go through various experiences that are different from each other, and they should all be respected, and they should all be honored. And this is the thought process behind all of this, So maybe that is something else that also has to be brought in. And I also wanted to bring up this subject matter, and I've had this discussion before with some of you on this panel about, yes, now we're talking about companies and organizations reaching out to these various communities and groups, but there is this disconnect that some of these groups and communities and newly formed organizations that center on marginalized communities and promote marginalized communities don't know how to communicate with the companies and organizations and know how to advocate, you know, whether it's about having some business experience or, you know, corporate relations on writing emails and things like that. You know, I was wondering, do you think it's also worth in investing in that education for those marginalized communities and groups and organizations that advocate for space to also have some sort of education?
I want to jump in on that, if you don't mind, Karima. That is spot on. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I am so fine admitting my white adjacent privilege. I was raised by a white family, adopted when I was just a teeny tiny little baby. And so I've always had access to those tools and to that education. And that has been a huge point of privilege in my life. And that's something I've been pushing for in other organizations, is to, you know, you're doing the outward work to feature marginalized community members in your advertisement and try to, you know, you go to marginalized community boards to hire folks, but they're not always giving them the tools and sharing that power with them, right? And so I've seen some LCOs, and I don't want to name any specifically, in some job postings, they'll post, here's how to write a resume, here's how to write a cover letter, here's, you know, what these things mean that we're looking for. And that's a good start. Those are really good ways to start doing that. But you know, I think organizing around that, as individuals, as groups, as organizations, to say we can start to spread that communication out and that level of learning, because we've always kept it to ourselves. And when I say ourselves, it's those with the privilege. And that's one way that they hold on to that power. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
I want to comment on, because we're getting to the last questions in the chat, so we can basically start wrapping everything up. I want to comment on, because I've seen it's on the Facebook Live chat, and a couple of them that's come up, and I have intentionally not asked this question. Yeah, Jess, you're muted. You're gonna stay muted. Right, I'm gonna put you in timeout for a second. I'm sorry. The question keeps coming up about why we refuse to ask Jess about Safari Land. And that's what you guys were in the news about when everything first came up. I told, when we initially decided to put this panel together, we're focused on solutions. We're focused on holding individuals and organizations responsible for their actions. To be quite honest, as Kai Leitner's mom, Kai can't control what I say or what I do. And he would probably get some choice words that I could not publicly say, you know, without a bleep, a bleep, a bleep filter coming if he tried to control what I do. And I think for that reason, it's a parent company. And the same way that, you know, the child-kid, you know, parent relationship, when you have a parent company structure with an organization, you cannot control what your parent company does. And if you notice, any tough question that came up that asked about BD's actions or inactions, I had no problem with asking those questions. But I intentionally did not do any asking about the parent company. If you have a problem with me and things that I say, come to me, boycott me, camp out on my lawn. But going to my kid because you don't like what he's saying, I didn't think that was quite fair game. That's why I didn't pose those questions. So I will address it, but I'll tell you why I didn't put those questions to the panel.
I think this also goes back to the point of privilege of education of business. You know, some people don't understand the relationship between the owner. Like, a good example is there's the VF group and then there's North Face. The VF group has many companies Dickies and a bunch of different brands underneath it. And then they also have North Face, which is specifically an outdoor brand, right? Now, if the owner of VF or the CEO of VF decides to do something that we find incredibly unfavorable, it's not North Face's fault. I mean, like, it just isn't, right? That's unfortunately how it works. It's like your boss did something. What are you going to do about it?
However, it is fair to hold BD accountable. Like you said, it's not their fault, but we can hold you accountable for what you do with the privilege that you've been afforded because of whatever you get. Because all kids, you profit from the work of your parents. So it's fair game to hold you accountable. Because, I mean, if Kai is trying to start Climbing for Change, trying to do diversity initiatives, trying to do things along that line, I'm going to be quite honest. If I am a committed asshole with a reckless mouth and I've decided this is what I'm going to be, I don't think that you shouldn't be going to Kai, who's trying to do right with the privilege that he has, fussing at him. I almost think that that's a weaker way out. Come to me. I mean, even though approaching Kai will probably be much easier to come to me.
I feel like it's easier to attack someone's kid instead of going straight to the parent, because that kid is so visible and I guess more accessible in a way. I personally, I would have found that dude. Well, I can't say what I'd do. This is Karima, protest Karima from college and high school. But
we can keep moving with topics. I'm sorry.
We're going to move on to the topic, but
I wanted to explain why I ignored those questions. I'm sorry, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And accelerating the process of education on how businesses work and the responsibility of each company. And again, you don't know what the owner of BD said to this guy who has this other company that creates these products that you don't like. You know what I mean? We don't know that. And those are internal things that have to happen. Like you said, if Kai didn't like something you said, he's not going to say it right here in front of 150 people. He's going to pull you to the side in a respectful way. Kirk Franklin's son totally did do that.
I'm sorry.
But you're going to pull him aside and say, hey, look, I respect our relationship. However, this is how I feel about what you did. And the freedom that BD has of taking their budget and going out and being responsible to their climbing community with their budget, that was what they could do fiscally responsibly. That was the power that they had. And using that platform, now going back to what Teresa said, it is about consistency. It's about sustainability and building that trust. And I can understand why, because I'm watching the chat, I'm watching all y'all comments. I understand exactly what you're saying. You're like, I still don't trust y'all. It's totally okay.
That's fair.
I have some companies I still don't trust right now for the same reason. However, I'm waiting to for that time to build up, to show that they're not just being performative, but they're being consistent, they're being real, that internal changes shall happen. And then I will cast my complete and final judgment.
And it's fair game to cast it. If that consistency isn't there, if a year from now, all the things that were done are dropped and it's business back normal, it's fair game. Okay, we are coming up on the hour-and-a-half mark and we are going to wrap things up. Are there any final comments, any advice, any things that you would like to say to people that are either starting their DEI journey in apprehensive, like Kyra was talking about earlier, or about people that are even more advanced and doing a lot of this work or heading up full organizations like Cody? Any comments, any advice that you want to give in order to help keeping this work moving forward?
Am I out of timeout now?
Yes, you're out of time. I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
I am not going to speak on that, but I do want to add, we understand, and I'll just leave it at that. But as far as advice for other companies that might be in, a situation like Black Diamond or just wanting to work on it as a company, my only advice is to get help. Talk to the people that know the communities, talk to the organizations that are already doing the work. Don't tell them what to do. Go to them with your resources and ask how to help. And that's it. I think if you do that and then follow through and keep following through, it makes a difference. So get help, pay for consultants, and yeah, go to the communities who know.
Hey, that's important. Teresa did a whole segment on compensation. So
yeah.
Yes. Okay, keep going. I'm sorry.
Or Jess, were you done, or I can go next?
Oh yeah, no, I'm done. Pay them.
Yeah, I guess the advice I would have is that I think it can really feel like you're not making a difference. Like, you know, posting on Instagram doesn't seem like it will do much, but, you know, social media is a huge tool, and it's, you know, a really good way to activate and create change. And, you know, so even if, like, you know, I don't run a nonprofit, you know, Kai is doing some amazing things with his nonprofit. And, but, you know, I do have like a following, so you can do that. You can donate time, you can donate money, you can, there's all sorts of ways that you can activate and help, that's not taking up space or you know, being problematic, you know, because I think that's the fear that a lot of people have, and so I think there's all sorts of ways that you can help just on a daily basis.
So it's use the platform that you have to make the difference that you can have in your own way, and as long as everyone does that, we're okay. Totally agree.
I'd just like to say one thing to Kyra. Kyra, you have huge potential in getting these messages out to the audience that follows you. The fact that you are, you have access to the United States and other countries' Olympic platforms, I would encourage you to use your voice to make them aware that the only way change is going to happen across the board is if everyone takes a stand. Everyone speaks to these issues. So I would just encourage you, and I know that's probably a lot of pressure to put on someone's shoulder, but you have the means to reach audiences that we don't. Just as Cody does, just as Jess does. You all have access to people that need to hear this. So I would just encourage you all to make sure you speak truth to power, and know that when you do that, we got your back.
Yeah, absolutely. I thank you. I completely agree. And that's why I'm, you know, so grateful to be a part of this conversation and to be able to talk to you, Kai, Connie, Cody, Karima, all of you, so that, you know, the message that we put out can, you know, promote inclusivity and diversity and, you know, all the right things.
Yeah. And Teresa, thank you for that. You queued up nicely what I wanted to say. Mine was not advice. It was a request to everybody that's part of this, everybody out there. Reach out to me directly through the American Alpine channel and help hold, you know, my position and the program of Climate United accountable, because you know, none of us are doing this for ourselves. We're doing it for the community, and so we need that feedback. And if you want to throw some punches, throw them. They're deserved. So just open-ended, reach out, and hopefully I don't regret that. And I also do want to say, knowing Kyra, she can take she's got big shoulders. She can take it. So great.
Teresa,
I just wanted to, like, my advice. It can be exhausting, you know, not everybody, advocacy comes in different forms. You know, you could be an Olympic athlete, a competitive athlete. You can be, you know, someone who runs a nonprofit, right? Or manages nonprofit, but your advocacy is every day that you live your life, every move that you make, everything that you do that is considerable. And so my advice for anyone starting is, don't think about starting big. You know, I never thought about starting a national nonprofit program. That was never in my process. My first thought was, I'm a person with a disability that likes to climb. All I have is able-bodied people around me trying to give me beta that does not work. And I want to climb with other people like me who understand how I move. You know, that was it. It was a total, you know, very just basic thing, which grew into more. You know, the more I grew, the more I evolved, the more the community and my recognition of their needs evolved. So don't think that you need to go out there and just completely change the world. Like, start where you are. It's a ripple effect, you know. You know, a pond is a lake, and a lake to a river to an ocean.
I love what you did with your organization. You started with your one little corner of the world that was important and expanded it. And so it's fine. Start with what's important, some of the things that are important to you. What you've done is great in the industry, Karima. So no, thank you also. And I think that's why I love this panel. Everyone comes from a different angle. And I think that has been great. Teresa, Kai?
I think that maybe the biggest even key concept I could hone in is just consistency. And maybe that's a lesson I've had to learn through athletics and sport, because I know that you don't see your progress and your work until like years down the line. But it's like often, and Teresa can probably attest to this even more, because I've only been doing this work like from a nonprofit perspective for a year now or less. But a lot of times we fight for inches. We fight for inches of progress, and we put a lot of effort just so that we can like see small amounts of progress. And it may not always feel the most rewarding, but just knowing that it works in the end, and we're trying to approach this work from a multi-pronged perspective. So when you're putting work in from one perspective, other people putting work from other perspectives, those interests add up, and it helps us get towards our ultimate goal, which is, I think, just seeing not only diversity, equity, and inclusion, is just seeing more diverse faces at every aspect and facet of the industry. Whether you see that with the people you climb at in the gym, the people who own the gym, the people who are on the board of companies, just trying to see as much inclusion in those spaces as possible. And that work is going to take a while, but just not being discouraged when it does.
Thank you. Teresa, you want to wrap up for us?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for bringing their authentic selves to the conversation. It's not an easy conversation to have, because people are watching and listening and comparing their reality to the statements that we make. We don't all have, the answers to this, but we're trying. So give people space to try. And hopefully we will stay committed to this work long enough to see the change that we're all fighting for. So thanks everyone for attending.